Yo, 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 what is going on, COD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today I wanted to focus on what I felt, as usual, are very important topics. Today, especially because I wanted to kind of have this be somewhat of a prelude to some of the videos that are to come. Specifically, we're going to be covering how to kind of teach, inform, and educate the everyday player on how to go about finding good pairings for your heroes. What goes into it? What are the identifiers? What do we look for? How do we even get to a conclusion where you may find or come across someone who seems or gives you the impression that they are very knowledgeable or they have quite a bit of experience in PvP, where they can tell you a pairing with the utmost confidence. But today, I really wanted to focus on what actually goes into that. And I'm going to show you what is a healthy, consistent process for going about finding good hero pairings in CoD. And then also, you can apply this even to other kingdom builders as well. So, with all of that being said, before we get started, if you enjoyed the content, make sure you sub, like, ring the notification bell, and of course, if you want to join and be a part of our conversation, hit up the Discord. You can find a link to that in the pinned comment description right down below. So number one here that we're going to touch on when it comes to identifying hero pairings is, and specifically, let me be very clear here, we're not really talking about gatherers and peacekeepers, right? Let me briefly touch on that first, just so I can kind of clear that up. With gatherers and peacekeepers, they have a very singular focus in that they're pretty much the more or less most ideal heroes to do those specific types of tasks. If I'm going to go out and gather resources, I'm clearly going to choose someone that has the gather, I don't know if I said marker, but the gather identifier, right, attribute. And just like if I want to go out and hunt darklings in the PvE space, I'm going to try and find heroes that have peacekeeping in them. Why? Because usually with peacekeepers, they're going to have some type of skill that does more damage to PvE units. With Eliana, for example, she has Purifying Touch. It's a passive skill, right? But it deals additional damage up to 25% to Darklings and Darkling creatures. Just like Kella here has a skill for Gathering. That's load capacity, excuse me. It's usually the number 2 or 3 skill. But you can see here gather bonus, and then she has a specific gather bonus for gold. So, again, we're not going to spend too much time on those. I really want to focus more on how to kind of identify PvP comps and pairings. But I at least wanted to take a minute just to explain this. Because you may, and let me preface this, not preface, but let me add a little asterisk here. There may still be opportunities where you can take someone such as Eliana and still use them in a PvP comp. Same thing could be said about someone like Bakshi, who's a legendary peacekeeper, just as much as Indus, who's a legendary gatherer, right? The two newest heroes thus far to CoD. It doesn't mean that you cannot use them, or you never should use them as a PvP hero in an actual PvP comp. It just means that you want to try and identify good PvP heroes that you can include in your compositions, and so you may not look at them right away, but it doesn't mean that you should not look at them. Now we get into number 2, which is what are the first markers that you really should be looking for when it comes to identifying how to put someone in a PvP comp. The first one here is going to be, you want to try and look at attributes. I like to go off of, do they have something in the middle that is more of a PvP identifier? And I'll give you a couple examples here. If I was to click on, we'll go Emrys, better example. This clearly says PvP, right? So that's pretty straightforward. Something like Cavalry, right? These talent trees, which is essentially what they are, right? If I go here and I scroll up, you can see Cav, PvP, Mobility, right? So the attributes here are essentially the branches of the talent tree. Something like Mobility probably isn't going to offer you a lot of damage, right? It doesn't mean that it's not useful. It just means that it may not offer you, right, just general overall damage. If I do someone like Garwood, right, I can see infantry, garrison, tank. This is probably more of what I would consider to be a sustain type hero. You may consider running Garwood as a primary, possibly. Something similar can be said about someone like Madeline, right? Infantry, PvP, tank. Someone that you may consider running as a primary. Someone like Lilia, who's magic, peacekeeping skills. Someone that you may run as a secondary. You may not necessarily run Lilia as a primary, and I'll explain why. The idea here is that when you're looking for PvP comps, let me explain. It doesn't mean that you won't or you would never run Lilia as a primary. But if you're looking at one type of Legion composition, you're going tank for sustain, which means that you are aiming to last longer in a fight, meaning that it will allow for you to output, hopefully, more overall damage than your opponents. Of course, you also have to factor that someone like Madeline is more of a close-up hero, because if you click on the first skill, you can see here where it says grants physical keen, increasing physical attack by 5%, also grants a shield, which absorbs damage. You could actually use Madeline in something like an infantry, even an archer type comp, right, where they're dealing more physical damage compared to running like Vestals or Mages, which are going to be doing more magic damage. You could also run her in a close range, right, close proximity, going melee. So there are sometimes heroes that can have mixed uses. You just have to be able to click. Really, it's just a matter of clicking on the skills, reading it, and then something like this, for example, is not going to be like Lilia's, right, where she has an actual very far range skill where it says deals magic skill damage to the target legion and another legion surrounding it, right? The attack range is very far. So if we were to, for example, then go and take a look at our units here, just as an example, and I was to click on this and then I went to info, I can look at what my attack range is, right? Okay, so Cav, that's melee. I can go here to Satyrs, which is witches. That kind of gives me the idea of magic, and I can see very far. I can also see here magic attack that it's telling me. If I go to the Beast Pens as an example, you'll see physical attack. So this is important to point out because you will notice that different units have specific attacks. This is actually something I really like because the game is proactively differentiating. Other games I've played, they sometimes will do both physical and magic damage. Something like Infinity Kingdom was a good example of this, where you would have immortals that would do both, but some would just do more of one or the other. I personally like that they simplify this and they just make it a lot easier for you to kind of go about choosing. If I was to look here at Axemen, well, Axemen, this is probably physical because they're close-up melee units. If I look at spear range, this is kind of what your siege would be, as an example. If I click here, that's physical. If I go over and I look at my flying units, as an example, and I click here, that's physical. So if you think about it, you have 4 physical type units and 1 magic unit, right? Now, if this is consistent and it is the same thing for the other 2 factions, because I just have 1 faction, maybe it varies a bit. If you go to, because we're on Wilderberg, right, so maybe League of Order has it a little different. Maybe Springwater might have an additional magic unit. The point here is to look and pay attention to those things, because that will factor into what types of heroes you may want to run in a specific comp. And then, do you want to run 2 ranged? Do you run a melee and ranged? Do you run 2 melees? Do you run very far? Do you run medium range? Do you run near, or do you run close range, right, or melee? And so the range that you would run can also vary and depend on what units you may run. An example, like I said, is that if I'm running a very far range, and we'll go back to someone like Lilia as an example, right, I'm going to run mages here. Why? Because mages have the farthest attack range. And then it's archers, and then I believe it's siege and or right there with archers. And then you have your flying, and then you have melee, right? So it's pretty much kind of in that order. And so when you understand this and you take time to test these things, you can figure them out. And then I would say kind of the third or fourth thing at this point is looking and reading the skills. Reading the skills is very important because it's good to understand, and even let me just give you kind of a quick example here. If you look at base stats for heroes, almost in any game, what you'll come to the conclusion is that typically base stats are increased as you go into higher tier levels. I'll show you an example. If we look at Lilia, who I don't have unlocked yet, you can see hero power is 6,400. If I click on this, you can see what the breakdown is, right? I have 1,200, which is the true base power. I have plus 200 for hero level, plus 5,000 for hero skills, even though I don't have anything unlocked yet. Now, if I look at a level 1 comparison on the epic side, I can see 4,100 power. Same thing, I don't have anything leveled. If you look at the breakdown, what you notice is the base power is half. The hero level, I think, is a little bit lower, and then the hero skills is a little bit lower, right? So we have 200 and 3,300, right? If I go here, you can see 200 and 33. So you're looking at, what, 1,700 plus, and then double the base power, right? So the hero level's the same. You have the base power, which is probably the biggest factor, really, at least until you start leveling up the skills, and then I'm sure that will scale more appropriately. But you actually have a stronger overall unit when you're looking at it from this perspective. Then you go and you would look at skills, right? And I would say, okay, well, I have a shield factor of 1,200. Well, let me give you kind of a damage to damage comparison. So if I go here, I see the skill damage factor is 600 to 1,200. And it says deals magic skill damage to the target legion and another legion surrounding it, which means, right, that it would do kind of times 2, right? So you can double this if you want and just make just simple math here, right? We'll say it's going to do 2,400 skill factor, even though it's really 1,200 once and then 1,200 again. And then it says has a 10% chance to scorch them, dealing magic skill damage, which is a damage factor of 200 affected by the legion's magic attack every second for 5 seconds. And then if let's look at someone who does magic on the epic side. So we'll compare it with Walder. So you can see skill damage factor is 300 to 600. That's half of Lilia. Same thing for Very Far. However, they do provide an attack reduction percentage compared to Lilia, where you get probability, right? And that's where this falls in, right? So this can go up to 50%, where you have that opportunity to scorch and basically do like a damage over time, kind of like a poison type effect. So you have double skill damage, you have a 50% chance for poison, just if we're just comparing active to active. And then here, damage, you're doing skill damage to the target legion and 2 legions surrounding it, right? So if you're doing 1,200 plus 1,200 to another, and we'll just do basic addition just to kind of make a point, you're looking at 2,400 damage that you're doing. Here, 600 times 3, you're looking at 1,800, right? So you're still about, 600 off? Which is about right, I guess, if you're looking at kind of an epic to a legendary comparison. It's not too much of a grant. But it says it inflicts gloom on them, reducing their attack by 12% for 2 seconds. This can go up to 20% for 2 seconds. And obviously this will hit proc, right, every time that the skill does. So you have a guaranteed that reduces attack for 2 seconds, but then you have a 50% probability on the legendary that can scorch and do kind of a poison damage over time. I think that's actually somewhat of a fair trade-off when you're thinking about it. And then, kind of continuing from the active skill, you would then want to look and read the rest of the skills, because you want to see how many skills does a hero have that are more PvP focused, right? So I can see here that active skill, that's PvP focused. If I look at this, all magic units in Walder's Legion gain attack and HP, that's PvP focused. Walder's Legion deals 4% more skill damage. Okay, that's PvP focused. When skill damage is taken, it grants a shield that can absorb a large amount of damage. Okay, that's PvP focused. If I was to, for example, let's say go to, let's just say, who is it, Bakar? Just to kind of give you an example here. No, hang on, I'm not going to go Bakar. Let's go Chakcha. So as an example for Chakcha, right, even though this is a gather, right, I just want to make a point. you can see the active skill. Okay, well, this is PvP focused. The second skill, okay, he does gathering. That's not really PvP focused. Right, you get the Legion load capacity bonus, so it's partly, but it's not in its entirety. Defense bonus, okay, that's PvP focused. Increases the HP of Chakra's Legion, automatically heals legions after defeating an enemy legion. Okay, well, that's PvP focused. So these are things that it's good to look at, right? I've even seen people run Chakra for behemoth raids. I've seen people run Chakra in actual PvP because the moment that you defeat a enemy legion, Chakra's skill procs, right? So if you're basically hanging out in the back with him and you have like a high output damage dealer and you're running something like ranged, every single time you defeat a legion with him, as long as you're doing damage to it, his passive procs. So this is why it's important to read all of the skills and then try and get a good idea on why you would run something. Like we mentioned before, Madeline, right? A tank sustain grants a shield, right? You can use that to your advantage to try and sustain longer in a fight. You can make the argument running 2 glass cannon ranged units that just do a lot of far ranged attacks might not be that bad. An example would be something, and I'm just throwing this out there, right? If you wanted to run like Lilia and then you wanted to run Eliana as your secondary, right? Because you're running 2 very far attack ranges, right? So you're probably going to run mage here, you're probably going to run mages, and you're able to proc a lot of the active skills from a very far range at safe distance if you're looking to try and do that. Like I said, there's a lot of different compositions, and I will be making videos that will go through each of the heroes. I'll do more specific kind of like budget guides if you're looking more on the pay-to-win side for guides, right, as far as pairings go, etc. I'll definitely come out with those. But I wanted this video to really focus more on breaking down how you go about finding pairings, what goes into it, and how everyone can do it, right? Of course, looking and watching videos and finding resources to figure those things out, right, are great to do. But having a better understanding, having a pure understanding where you as the individual, you as the player, can break down, do the research, find good pairings, understand why they're good pairings, and then be able to explain that to someone else because you have a great understanding of it, there is no other feeling like that. So that's my challenge to you as a player, is do your due diligence. Take time to educate yourself. Of course, for those that have the time, I should say. And then the last one we're going to get into here is talents. Talents are important to go through and read because you never know what you're going to find, right? I click on everything when I go through a talent tree, and I'll read everything, and I'll figure out what is something that I want to run. I'll tell you here is kind of a pro tip towards the end of the video. Focusing on, a lot of players will tell you, at least I should say veteran Kingdom Builder players who've done testing, will tell you that HP is probably the best stat to really go for. Other people will swear by attack. You don't often hear too many people, preaching defense, so to speak, unless you're looking for just heavy sustain for some reason. But even in most cases, players will usually preach or at least advocate for HP. And usually the big reason why is because HP is something that gives you a level of sustain yourself, right? If you have higher or denser HP, then that allows for you to essentially last longer in a fight. And if you're able to last longer in a fight, you can get more skills off, you can get more of your passive skill procs off. And then you have other people who will say, well, you know what, I like to go attack, and maybe attack is the better way to go. If you're like, for example, if I'm playing ranged, right, and let's say I'm playing mage or I'm playing archers, I might not care too much to dive into HP and to dive into defense. Why? Because I might rather build a glass cannon build where I'm just kind of doing nuker comps, or nuker, comps, yeah, where I'm basically doing nothing but just high attack, high normal attack, things like attack speed, skill, more on skill damage. I don't care about taking damage reduction. I want to output as much damage as possible. And that's what I always find is interesting about the different comps, is that you can really kind of tailor make stuff to what type of playstyle you want to try. And that's why it's important to click on everything in a talent tree, so you can try and get a good understanding. right? Going HP, always a safe bet. If you want to go more nuker, more glass cannon, then maybe you just focus on doing more damage output for what you can do. But clicking on everything is important because, like I said, you just never know what you're going to find. You never know what might be useful. Even if you invest your 43 points into a talent tree right to the end, you still have some points left over until 60. You can actually be able, if I wanted to, I could go all the way into the peacekeeping tree, and I could go all the way to the first milestone of another tree, and then I think it's one or two beyond that. So just to kind of give you an idea, right, on how you're able to navigate a talent tree, is that it's also good as well to, another reason I'll explain why it's important to go through a talent tree, because you may find out that one hero has a better talent tree, or has better talent tree optimization than another hero does. When you were thinking of using one hero as the primary, it actually turns out the secondary has a better talent tree, and maybe that compensates for their skills not being that good, because you would and that leads you to running that hero because they have a more suitable talent tree, and that's why you want them. That's why you would then opt to choose them as the primary. So again, I hope that this video, if anything, I know it's a little long, but I hope this video at least does a good job of explaining how to go about finding compositions, what to look for, what to pay attention to, and then really it just comes down to testing, right? Of course, and I guess if I was to leave you with a very last thing, and I'll probably do another video on this, is that if you're free to play, of course, it's probably going to be better for you to focus on leveling your epics rather than your legendaries, right? With the exception of like your Peacekeepers and your Gatherers, for example. But even still, looking to try and level up your epics and then your elites and kind of getting through those ones first, at least for the important ones, right? I'm always a fan of leveling my Peacekeepers, my Gatherers, and then eventually getting to a point where I go to my PvP units. The reason I believe that is because if I can have up to 5 legions and there's 5 Peacekeeper heroes that I'm able to unlock, I would rather run those as my primary, have an easier time attacking higher level PvE units to gain more overall XP, therefore being able to level up my gatherers that much faster, and then in turn eventually level up my PvP units that much faster, until eventually, maybe my Peacekeepers get max level and then you rotate and then you're just running your PvP units as your primaries at that point, at least until you need to run a Peacekeeper again. So again, there's a few ways to do it, but the point is that this really, I hope, will be a good introduction, if anything at all, to how you can go about navigating and finding good hero pairings for your playstyle, depending on what you want. And I know I didn't touch on artifacts because that really is that's going to be a solo video, of course. And I really just wanted to focus on trying to help players figure out, again, to kind of sound like a dead horse at this point, how you can go about figuring out what type of pairings you want to run. And if anything, I hope this video did a good job of that. So that's it for me. I would love to hear your thoughts, your comments down below. Did anything I say make sense? Did it resonate with some of you? Do maybe you now have a better roadmap for going about figuring out what pairings you want to run, what playstyle you want to run? Maybe it even just helps you figure out, you know what, I really want to test this, or I really want to test that. I would love to hear anything and everything down below. That is it for me. As always, until next time, I will catch you later.